Reserve. The root of all our evil, it begins with the Federal Reserve. Hey, yeah, well, let's go back in time when everybody was so proud of America.
I'm Tommy Salmons. This is Year Zero. Today, it is raining. I don't know if you can hear that. Probably not. I don't know why I'm informing you that it's raining. I have Coop back on the podcast for episode 4, where we talk about young men. We talk about the problems with young men. We talk about finding status as a young man. We talk about all sorts of crazy shit that you young men do not want to miss out on. We're probably going to follow up with this with a couple of other characters. We're in the talks of trying to work that out. So as soon as we get that lined up, I will get it out to you. But Coop is always a blast to talk to. He's always insightful and knowledgeable and a lot of fun for me. Makes me think, as you will hear. But first, as always, RyanBunting.com. For all of your graphic design needs, go to RyanBunting.com. Ryan Bunting is great anarcho-capitalist and a great libertarian. He's also a, let me see, hold on. Oh, yes, that's what it says. Great graphic designer. He designed my podcast logo and that other guy at the Libertarian Institute that people seem to like so much, his podcast logo too. So, RyanBunting.com for all of your graphic design needs. And thank you, Tom Burton, for the music. Okay, enjoy. I am here once again, joined by Mr. Coop. What's going on, bub?
Not much, thankfully, but thanks for listening to my bullshit again.
I'm enjoying your bullshit.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
Good. Not many people do, to tell you the truth. I guess that's why I spend most of my time alone.
Makes me
But
think.
yeah, I wish I had a choice on that. Unfortunately, insomnia is probably the greatest single instigator of any deep thoughts, and I think that might be true for a lot of deep thinkers who tend to do their best work at night, so to speak. I think today we'll hit on maybe one half of our species in the issue with men nowadays and boys.
Yeah.
As last time we talked about how bullying was somewhat of a necessary component to basically corral negative behaviors due to peer influence. And I have to iterate again, I'm not talking about the bullying of a person for things that are beyond their control, like religion or racism or ability or disability or their class or anything like that. What I was saying was that we throw out all components of it without being specific, and in doing so, we get rid of the aspects of it that are actually serving a function to our species. So I just wanted to make that clear. I'm not down with bullies, so to speak.
Yeah.
I'm just not down with tossing out behaviors without looking at the consequences. So we've got a problem with boys and young men, I could start by pointing out that in our society, we have developed, well, I shouldn't say our society, our species, we have developed, what can I say, overtly aggressive behaviors in order to deal with specific problems of our species. In that war was developed as a way to cull out unnecessary males within a society who did not have the best biological opportunity to carry on their genes, so to speak. And I know that's quite a statement to make, but it's true within almost every other animal species, in that not every male gets to mate. So what happens is, and this was noted by H.G. Wells in a book he wrote called The New World Order.
Mm-hmm.
And he wrote about, this was 1947, I think. He wrote about the troubles with young, purposeless men and how they can be radicalized to create civil strife within nations. And he was talking about more or less an industrialized society where the ability for men to work and create a family unit was being impinged upon by the beginning of automation. So it created a sense of hopelessness within many young men that they would ever have the opportunity to provide for and raise a family. And we've hit that cycle previously, and that was at the burgeoning of industrialized civilization.
Mm-hmm.
And there was excess populations of men in Europe. And the way to handle that, whether or not it was part of an intentional politic, or whether or not it was kind of a subconscious zeitgeist in our species, we ended up creating 2 world wars in order to remove excess populations of men who would have caused a great degree of civil strife in the beginning of the industrial era.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of young men died. So the question has to be asked, what would have happened had there not been 2 world wars to curb a population? And the First World War directly bled into the problems that the Second World War kind of took care of in that sense. Mm-hmm. And the First World War left an entire generation of young men bereft of their fathers due to war casualties.
Right.
And the general destruction of the First World War in that generation also created a social and economic climate where the next generation of men, bereft of fathers, mm-hmm. additionally had the lack of purpose due to growing industrialization and the lack of proper guidance due to not having a male figure in their life. Mm. So it created a double whammy, so to speak, on the social scale. And as a result, you had a lot of radicalizing movements starting within that era. So And it resulted in a lot of the young communist movements, um, getting getting young men to radicalize in order to change the societies that they're a part of. It also represented the first rise of fascism, which was basically a French take on communism, um, because they recognized that the proletariat was not going to rise based upon Marx's concept of why they should rise. So they had to take it away from a material sense and create a spiritual sense, um, in order to motivate the revolution, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
So, point being, you had a lot of radicalism fired up at the exact same time where you had surplus plus populations of young men who didn't have a chance of fulfilling an innate purpose, and at the same time didn't have the guiding hand of a father to show them a correct way, or manage them in any sense. So
Yeah.
as
Well,
we
I just wanted to
yeah
I just wanted to bring up too. You know, as you're going through this topic, I'm imagining the modern society and what we're seeing today with the
that's what we're going to come to.
yeah with the amping up of tensions between China and the U.S. and the possibility of another world war right at the dawn, or not even really the dawn, but the pinnacle of a new technological era. So I can definitely
I knew
see the parallels that you're drawing here.
Yeah. So the most modern iteration of that was the birth of ISIS
Mm-hmm.
and the appeal to young purposeless men in relatively Western civilizations who just packed up and went to tote a gun in the Middle East for this radical idea that promised them a purpose, that promised them family, that promised them status.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Gunnar Heinzen, uh, university professor at Bremen, did a paper on the Nazi movement in relation to the population of excess purposeless young males in the depressed economy of Germany, and found excellent correlation with regards to the age of individuals who made up the bulk of the brown shirts and their family conditions, as well as the population bubble that was kind of required in order to push it over the top. What people have to remember is that the Nazi movement was around for a relatively long period of time before it gained momentum and it gained power. And the time at which it started to gain momentum and power correlates to the population of young men coming up through their teens. And when they hit young adulthood and started to recognize their lack of purpose or the lack of prospects, at that same time was when the momentum for the Nazi machine started picking up speed. You'll find the same thing going back even further. I would suggest that a population census of demographics regarding this wasn't hasn't been undertaken to my knowledge, but I would suggest that you'd find a similar thing, a similar phenomenon in the Crusades, so to speak. But it's expressed through a different demographic in that you had the second born sons and third born sons of nobility who had no purpose and had no chance of gaining status, as they were not direct heirs to their familial powers, in having to find a purpose and therefore taking up arms in the crusade in order to fulfill that and gain a certain amount of status.
Mm-hmm.
Status being associated with piety at that time. Um,
The
so we have
the
that.
I was just going to ask you if you thought the engineering of the military industrial complex, the perpetual war that's been going on overseas for, I mean, decades now. I mean, we could look at Afghanistan has been happening for 20 years. You had made a comment that earlier that whether it's intentional or it's part of the zeitgeist, part of the human condition to create these situations, these scenarios, it almost feels to me like it would be part of the human intuition to to cull the herd through war and to because I read some of these guys and they talk about depopulation, and there's obviously some amount of scholarly work out there that recognizes the necessity for depopulation and how much a growing population actually hurts the human condition. But it really, I wouldn't mark the George W. Bush up to being involved in some mass conspiracy on these levels to depopulate the earth. And even as far as the amount of people that excuse and cheer on these violent activities overseas, it really does lend itself to this the subconscious psychological like makeup to push humanity in the direction of war, uh every generation or every century or whatever it may be, in order to thin the herd.
Well, we are very much still subject to to the natural rhythms with
Mm-hmm.
regards to the things that affect every population,
Mm-hmm.
um, whether we like to admit it or not. And if I would say that anything is manufactured, it's manufactured based upon an understanding of that,
Mm-hmm.
right? And understanding the triggers for that, and in which case it's more manipulated than manufactured. So you can, just like you can direct the growth of a plant, but
Mm-hmm.
you're not the cause of the growth of the plant,
Right.
right? You can direct the outlet if you understand the mechanic that's at work.
Right.
Um, in that, like ISIS did, for example. ISIS understood very much that there was a population of disaffected young Muslim men in Western countries whose whose faith was not specifically jiving with the society that they were living in. And as a result, it would create a disparity of opportunity, and they could take advantage of that in order to recruit for their cause. So it's recognizing a market for the concept, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the market being created is wholly a part of a natural rhythm of our species. Um, to a certain extent, all of these things are aspects of the shadow, and a lot of people say the shadow self, but there is also the shadow society, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Those dark currents that move behind the scenes that we're kind of afraid to look at, because for the most part they are responsible for the most horrific and terrible acts and actions our species have ever done to each other, to
Mm-hmm.
itself. Um, but again, unless we look at these things realistically and maturely and accept their existence, and there is nothing we can do to curtail it, or minimize its negative effect. It just becomes something that can be manipulated by individuals that are less than scrupulous with regards to how they apply their power. So it ultimately boils down to two major aspects having influence on how this gets directed. And so far, it has been advances in technology. So with industrialization, right, you had an agrarian society that was largely dependent upon physical labor, moving towards factory and manufacturing, that cut out the requirement for a lot of hands-on workers, therefore creating the crisis of purpose or the crisis of opportunity, or both, for young men in those generations. Nowadays, you have the same thing being represented by advances in technology, in computer technology, as well as a general crumbling from that technology and the social condition of even the concept of the family unit, both of which are biological imperatives for our species as we have evolved. So when you start breaking down the family unit, and then you start breaking down the means with which a family unit can be supported, then you have a two-pronged attack on the stability of our species. And you basically manufacture an excess population and remove the potential for it to have purpose, which creates a large proportion of easily radicalized young men who still feel very much a masculine spirit, even though they can't put a voice to it. And the unfortunate thing is, when that coincides with not having a father in the home in order to direct that to a correct end, or say, look, this is a net negative and this is a net positive. These actions are acceptable masculinity. This is unacceptable masculinity. Then you lose any limiting or monitoring factor, which makes media the ultimate influence on how these young men start perceiving their place in the world. So it's no longer a personal relationship with an individual who cares about you, directing you. It's an uncaring and unrelenting message from apparently everywhere, because that's how it seems. Men are bad, men toxic, etc., etc. And there's nothing you can do about that. You were born with the sin of being a man. And on top of that, whatever you feel or whatever you desire as a part of your natural process of being a male is also going to be denied you. And that is what radicalizes young men. It's not a message. It's not speech. It's not an ideology. Those are conditions that radicalize young men. And that's what we're going to be facing here very shortly in the Western sense, as the screws keep getting turned without it being addressed properly. You either have radicalization or you have criminalization, and both are not positive aspects for any society. So the question becomes, what can we do about this? We've any former organization or structure has basically been deconstructed to help with that. So there are no Boy Scouts for all intents and purposes is gone. Men are not allowed to have men exclusive clubs anymore in the name of diversity and equity and inclusion. And therefore, there is nothing very specifically tailored on a societal level in order for proper communication and intimate communication, man to man or man to young man, about things that need to be discussed. Because a very simple truth is that men do not like to express weakness to anyone other than those individuals that they trust, and certainly not to women.
Mm.
So if you eradicate those spaces where they can express weakness, then that weakness becomes the dominant aspect of the individual we're talking about. Prone to anger, no discipline. Yeah.
No, I was going to say it would seem like creating a situation where a man is not able to vent these weaknesses and to have these healthy male relationships would create a situation to where you have a bunch of weak men that are embittered looking for outlets to express their masculinity.
Yes, but more specifically, looking for outlets to express their bitterness.
Well, right. It would almost lend itself to being a situation where you have no healthy relationship with what masculinity actually is. So then you have the situation, as we hear all the time, of toxic masculinity, so to speak. And what it is an expression of one's bitterness as a representation of their masculinity.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Because there is no process of differentiation being introduced.
Right.
There is no oh well, this is good and this is an aspect you have to curb, because we have to keep in mind there isn't anything that is solely good.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I've used this before. Like a gun is a tool and it's a weapon. It depends on who's behind the trigger. Mm-hmm. Right. And it's the same with the personality traits. Right. Your best personality trait is just a reflection of your worst as well. Right. Okay. So with masculinity, for example, men are protective. And the other side of that protectiveness, which is good because you want a man to stand up and protect his family. The other side of that is jealousy, right? Mm-hmm. But they're two sides of the same coin. And if no man is there to say, hey, the fact that you're protective is good, but the fact that you're jealous is bad, then there is no differentiation between the two. There is no recognition that they are of the same parent feeling, so to speak. Mm-hmm. So one too easily dominates, and the one that usually dominates with regards to character traits are negative ones, and that is because we have such a negative overall sense of threat coming from our society. And so the natural reaction is to assume the negative model of whatever behavior there is, right?
Right.
It's self-protection to a certain extent, yeah. Right? And pride, which is another one of those double-edged things that gets roped into toxicity. See, a person can have dignity, right? Or a person can be proud. And having dignity is much the same as being proud, but proud has a negative connotation. Um, pride has the negative connotation of being willing to um, suffer unnecessarily um, due to a manifestation of ego, whereas dignity is a presence or a sense that that forces people to respect you as an individual, right? But they're both born of the same parent. And again, we don't have any differentiating message coming to young men saying, hey, that's prideful and it's okay for you to have dignity, right? But it's not the same as pride,
Right.
right?
And so this actually, is this why the instinct of the young man to find a channel and to find that boys club, so to speak, is this why you saw such a curb and a rise to Jordan Peterson a couple of years ago?
Yes, Jordan Peterson, his his overall appeal is that of an archetypal father figure that says, "Hey, this has got to stop," right? Because it's the negative aspect of this which has to be focused on, right? So, without, well, Jordan Peterson, if you want to kind of delineate his main thematic message, was that discipline and self-discipline has to take precedence as as the parent lesson to anything else in which a young man is going to learn throughout their life. And that without self-discipline first providing that foundation, every other lesson that's going to be learned is going to be skewed by those negative components of masculinity, right? So you have the how can I say this? The ability for men to form tribes of brotherhood, right, is excellent on the premise that they are formed for healthy reasons. But that same mechanic can be used to form radical groups which cause a negative outcome, right? So a cell of terrorists has the same sense of brotherhood that a fire station with firemen has it,
Right.
right? One is obviously bad and the other one is obviously good, but what's the difference? The difference is a bitterness that is usually the expression of a terrorist cell against their perceived enemy, and that's because of their unwillingness to accept their personal lack of discipline and personal responsibility for things that occur in their life or the direction that their life is going. Whereas a group of firemen have a brotherhood in the sense that they recognize their responsibility to a greater society and have the discipline to be willing to put themselves at risk to benefit said society. And in order to do that, they've had to have personal self-discipline and gain the abilities to serve in that manner, right?
Well,
But it's that same mechanic. There's that same sense of brotherhood, right?
right. Well, and the brotherhood is bound. I would say in the aspect of a terror cell, these people are acting on entitlements, whereas in your situation with a fire department, they're acting on responsibility.
Yes, and again, a terrorist cell doesn't form because people are happy with their lives or have purpose, right? So these things don't happen in a bubble. So if we recognize that's an innate characteristic of humanity and males, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we do not address the social conditions that make the negative outcome from that aspect of males and do something about those social conditions, then we can expect radicalization with negative consequences,
Mm-hmm.
right? There is no blaming the individual in that situation when it's a social condition we can easily recognize, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's after we adjust our social view of these things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And change the conditions that that leave young men feeling purposeless and bitter, right? When we can address those conditions, then you can start introducing the self-discipline and the personal responsibility, right? But we cannot do that if there are no fathers in the home. We cannot do that if the groups and establishments specifically to deal with this issue are being deconstructed and removed from our society. There's just nothing there. There's no substructure with which to build young men on today. They have video games. They have their basement of their parents' home until they're 30. They're not going to university anymore. They're not getting an education anymore. They're not pursuing the path of creating a family because they don't see any point in it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, again, this does not address the spirit of man in that sense, because they will still be downstairs on their Xbox or PlayStation or whatever, conquering, right?
Yeah.
They will be fulfilling that role and gaining status in whatever group they play that video game with, whether it's a first person shooter and they are playing as some commando and they are at war. They are still gaining status. They are still getting that feeling of conquest. They still maintain they have a purpose within that unit. All of these things are being fulfilled in a virtual sense, but it's empty. It doesn't fulfill any real life goal. It is just a shallow replacement for a real life that is still very much desired, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is still a biological imperative. There is no end. There is no true end game to the games that they play anymore. There is no family to protect, right?
Mm-hmm.
There is no family to provide for. So they get so many credits through winning this game or that game, and that is the reward for it. They get the brotherhood by playing with this group of guys. They have this feeling of defeating another group of guys, but there is no wife, and there is no child, and there is no family dog, and there is no home that has to be paid for. There is no true sacrifice either.
Mm-hmm.
So you're getting virtual masculinity, right?
Mm.
And virtual masculinity, as much as it covers the base, it's like drinking water to fill your stomach because you're hungry.
Mm.
It might make you feel full, but it's not giving you the nutrients that you need,
Right.
right? And eventually you'll starve to death
Mm-hmm.
just by drinking water. And that's kind of where we're at right now. And as you said before, this is what's kind of leading into the next global conflict is the recognition of that in the human zeitgeist. Is that the next wave of removing ability for people to find purpose is going to be done by further advancements in artificial intelligence and machinery, the next wave of technological advancements. And when you combine that with the seeming push to cut down on the jobs or manufacturing sectors where manual labor is still king, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think we can use trucking as an example.
Yeah.
When you start eradicating trucking jobs with self-driving electric vehicles, then you are taking out one of the last avenues for a young man to start earning a living in order to fulfill the purpose of having a family.
Mm-hmm.
You're cutting that out.
Yeah.
To a certain extent, it's reflective of everything seeking to become, so to speak, carbon neutral, is going to represent massive cuts in manufacturing due to the expense that's going to be tied to manufacturing things now, which will leave only one or two competitors in a business sector that used to support maybe 50 or 60.
Mm-hmm.
So it'll be prohibitive costs for the expansion of industry that's going to cut down on the available jobs in that industry as well.
Right.
So we have twofold attack on employment opportunities for uneducated or those with very little education. And if you look at university statistics with regards to who's graduating, it's women, it's not men.
Right.
Men represent the largest sector going forward in the future of uneducated people that will require those manufacturing jobs that are going to be pulled out of existence. So if you look at ISIS as an example of that, once again, you have non-industrialized Middle East, right?
Mm-hmm.
With a burgeoning population of young men, with a lot of women moving away from traditional Islamic roles and in fact getting university education, especially in the West, right?
Yeah.
And you had those young educated Muslim males in the West not achieving the same levels of success as the Muslim women, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the Muslim women holding off on marriage because of their education, and then wanting a higher or equal status male, then it left a whole bunch of Western Islamic young men without a marriage prospect, without a job, and it was very easy to radicalize them and get them to join a military gang in the Middle East that promised a return to a tradition that will once again give them a purpose.
Right.
And everything that comes along with it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's absolutely zero difference between that condition and the condition we're going to be facing in the next 5 to 10 years.
Right.
If you look at it demographically.
So much of the focus of my podcast is to point out abuses of power and how bad things have gotten and the direction in which we're heading as a society. And it can be a real black pill. I've partnered up with Richard Grove to offer my listeners an opportunity to sign up to his Autonomy Course. The Autonomy Course is designed for people looking for solutions, people that want to shape their own future, people that are not willing to be at the behest of large corporations or the United States government or the banking system. The Autonomy Course is designed for those of you who wish to have complete control of the reins of your life, who are looking to be successful, to thrive and not just survive, to provide for your family by utilizing your existing skills and learning how to market and sell those skills in order to be your own boss, or learn new skills in order to leverage that into a new career opportunity. So if there's a job out there you've been trying to get or you've been wishing you could get, but you just don't have the skills for it, the Autonomy Course is the place for you to start, to learn how to land that position, to learn how to market yourself better, to gain confidence, and to be surrounded by a community of like-minded people that will encourage you and help you along the way. So use my affiliate links and go check out the Autonomy Course. It could be right for you.
Well, and I read an article yesterday, I think it was, by James Bovard, where he's talking about the U.S. Fight or war on domestic terrorism, and one of the things that they're really targeting are the what quote unquote what they call involuntary celibate, population, the young men that are not out there socializing and dating and getting married, as you're saying, and that they're worried about them becoming these domestic terrorists, these domestic extremists, and that they're
Yes,
really...
I do have a note to say on that is I don't know any man that isn't involuntarily celibate for at least 80% of their life. Because when you're not having sex, you're involuntarily celibate. Like, I think that is just very it's a very thin, it's a smoke screen, and it's actually a smoke screen that I'd like to talk about in another episode,
Okay.
which we discussed earlier, because it's part of that. It's wrapped into that.
All right.
Very, very much wrapped into that.
Okay. Well, here's what I'm looking at. Here's part of what I'm wondering too. Is this... I don't give any government very much credit for being very smart. They're not efficient. They're and they're just they don't strike me as impressive, any of them, in any way. And so I look at this potential that they're moving into this potential like war with China or another world war of some sort as more of an accident. They're kind of stumbling their way into it. And it seems like what they're trying to avoid more so than anything is a civil war. And in the way that they're choosing to attack the growing divide in domestically is creating more tensions abroad. And so, though it might be part of the psyche, that I think that there's something going on domestically, at least in the U.S. or in Western countries especially, that isn't being addressed.
Oh gosh, once again, this is going to bleed into another topic, that the actual same one. It's a big tent topic, and this is great that you're mentioning these things, because it will lead into our next talk quite nicely. But as far as it goes, that's the condition of males that we see in our society, and I do not see any way out of it other than reestablishing men's clubs, right?
Mm-hmm.
That take young men under their wing and say, "Hey, I'm gonna set you straight. Okay, I'm gonna
Mm-hmm.
tell you the way it is.
Right.
I'm gonna show you the value of discipline. I'm gonna show you the value of sacrifice, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna show you the value of dignity, right?
Yeah.
And how you achieve and maintain your dignity, right? The social climate right now in this culture war, right, that we're
Mm-hmm.
experiencing, it's very undignified.
Right.
I have to say, my disappointment in a lot of people that are saying the right things is that they're saying the right things for the wrong reasons,
Mm.
right? They're saying it as a clap back against uh, delusional concepts when they should just be saying it because it's truthful,
Right.
right? Truthful and necessary. But it's being framed in an undignified way, as though it's you hit me and I'll hit you back, right?
Yeah.
But that is never a good enough reason to strike somebody if you're a man,
Right.
right? And in that, it's just feeding to this concept of toxic masculinity, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because the bottom line is, if you're a man, you don't hit somebody just because they hit you. You have to consider who and what they are compared to your relative ability before you consider that as a proportional response.
Yeah.
And that is an aspect of dignity, right?
Right.
So we don't have that dignity. We have just people lashing out and lashing back and getting clicks and likes and building careers. And whether they recognize it or not, they're still drifting off of a negative drift, right?
Yeah.
Which is undignified.
Well,
Um,
in the way that people are build status nowadays is all about
exactly.
how often or how well you can get this clap back.
Yes. Yes. And that is not masculine.
Right.
That is not good masculinity. All that is amplifying the negative aspect, right? And rewarding it with status,
Mm.
right? So that brings me into the other angle. So if you have the reestablishment of mentorship for
Mm-hmm.
young men, you also have to have the reestablishment of a means of status that is correctly aligned with goals for a positive society, which is also what we're missing.
Right.
If you take a look at current population of young males, especially in the Black communities in the United States, um, the media has been responsible for um, basically killing those generations, in that they presented the status reward as being equivalent to the reward of criminality. It's extant within movie representation. It's extant within music representation. Um, and you have people representing themselves as criminal elements that have never committed a crime in their life, but they've got the #1 hip hop album
Mm.
out there, and it's talking about them committing crimes,
Right.
when that's just not their reality at all, right? So it's
Mm-hmm.
giving a negative status achievement benefit to behaviors that yield no positive dividends for either the individual or the society.
Right. Yeah. It's the glorifying of so-called thug life or whatever. Yeah.
Yes, and then you're seeing the subsequent media reaction to their own guilt for that, in supporting and seeming to support the Black Lives Matter movement, et cetera, en masse, for because of a condition that they created,
Right.
right? It's just a guilt reaction, and just a a prayer amongst Hollywood and entertainment industry elites that somebody doesn't point this out
Mm-hmm.
and attribute responsibility to where it should go. You know,
Well, and those that do point it out are, you know, labeled as mentally ill or racist or bigoted or whatever. And you're like, well, no, actually, I think they're just pointing out an absolute truth here
they're
that
pointing out an absolute truth.
we're looking
And
at.
if you want to look at divisions within the nation, you have like a, a rural community, right, that has predominant dominant demographic of whites, and an urban community that has a predominant demographic of non-whites, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they're both receiving the same media. One is the urban community is receiving the status through criminality message,
Mm-hmm.
right? And associate and racial association.
Mm-hmm.
And the rural community is receiving the message that urban blacks are all criminals.
Mm-hmm.
And they get that from the same production.
Right.
And then you have that same entertainment industry that has benefited from this going, oh, this is terrible racism, right? When to the individuals in both communities, no, this is just the way it is, right?
Right.
Like both communities will say this is just the way it is, and both of them are just perceiving the same fabrication of an entertainment industry that is profiting.
Yeah.
And it's really pathetic that it can't be seen by these victims, and I say that victims of both the rural white communities and the urban black communities, victims of an entertainment industry, because the medium is the message, and the message is the medium,
Yeah.
right?
Well,
So who's going to take responsibility for that?
and this has been something kind of in a roundabout way that I've been really focusing my shows on. I talked to a gentleman yesterday who his run was a politician running for Senate under the Libertarian Party, but I didn't want to talk to him about politics. What I wanted to talk to him about is he's a carpenter and he's a father, and he grows his own vegetables, you know, and he's teaching his kids to carpentry, and he's in, you know, jujitsu and how to grow their own food and be self-sufficient. And so I had him on to talk about that. And one of the things we were talking about is, oh, so many males are buried in books or video games, as you said, and not getting out there and acting and doing in any way. And I don't know if they're afraid to fail or they've never been taught that these skills are, you know, useful in life, or I haven't gotten around to why so many don't want to interact with nature and to work in nature. But
because it's a sacrifice, Tommy. That's the sacrifice, is spending what appears to be non-productive time and effort to a goal that you're unsure of the outcome of, right? In order to see or gain the benefits of those actions.
yeah, see,
So
I was thinking like
you're not going to go outside and hike up a mountain, right?
Uh-huh.
Unless you really want to see what the view is and you're convinced that there's going to be a view,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
They just look at the mountain and go, that's not worth climbing.
Yeah. Yeah. See, I was thinking that the social condition of young men nowadays has been shaped so negatively by this idea of helicopter parenting that became so popular in the early 2000s, that they were never allowed to fail. and therefore they're afraid of going out and trying things because they're afraid they're going to fail.
How can a boy ever understand their resilience, right, without getting their knees scuffed?
Right. Yeah.
Right. How are they going to know which tree limb is going to result in them falling unless they try that tree limb and fall?
Yeah.
Right. Like when I was a kid, we'd set up ridiculous ramps to hit with our bikes.
Mm-hmm.
And 9 times out of 10, we would be unsuccessful, and it would result in a bruise, a scuff, a scratch, a fat lip, potentially a black eye, sometimes a twisted ankle or a messed up wrist.
Mm-hmm.
But that one time that we landed it, that was enough for us to try another 10 times.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. I can't tell you how many
and you don't
ramps
have that. You just don't have that.
Can't tell you how many ramps we broke trying to roll over them, and they just weren't sturdy enough to hold the weight of the bike in us, you know. Like,
yeah. And that's the other thing. You actually had to learn how to build a ramp too,
mm-hmm.
that would work.
Right.
So if you're being denied all of that, right,
mm-hmm.
just by an overzealous fear of any type of discomfort that your parent may have on your behalf, then what chance have you got facing a world that operates on the entropy of grinding everything up into raw materials to spit new life out?
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
You don't stand a chance.
Yeah. And you know, nowadays the term is so used as such a pejorative, but to pick yourself up by your bootstraps, you know, to get up and dust yourself off and try again. And people look at that as a negative.
Yep.
You know, in the media, I hear it all the time. Oh, what are they going to do? Just pull themselves up by their bootstraps? It's like, well, that's how you learn resilience. That's how you learn to succeed. You learn to succeed by learning how to fail.
Yeah. And the question can always be asked, well, are you going to pick them up by their bootstraps?
Right. No.
And that's when you see everybody lift their hands and walk away.
Right. Right. No,
right.
We
so
it's
if we're not going to take if we're not going to take responsibility and we're going to criticize a concept, but we're not willing to take responsibility for our own opinions on that, so to speak, and I don't mean you or I.
Yeah.
If we're going to go, oh no, you can't have that pull yourself up by your bootstrap philosophy, but I'm not willing to do anything else beyond criticizing that, then what good is that serving?
Right.
What you're doing is creating a situation where they have no choice but to pull themselves up by their bootstraps or definitely fail.
Right.
Right.
Right. Well,
that's
oh, go ahead.
Criticism is so easy, right? And it's easy because it's a virtual replacement for actually building something, right? But it doesn't provide the same satisfaction. It just provides that dopamine hit. It's the same as the kid playing video games. It's a virtual replacement for actually accomplishing something.
Right.
Right. And criticism is a virtual replacement for actually building something.
Right. Well,
anybody that does build something, the critics can go to hell.
Yeah.
Like.
Yeah. What
well, if you don't like it, don't look at it.
What I was going for a second ago, though, where I was going was, you know, you have the parent. As a parent, you never like to see your child fail. It's painful to watch. You don't like it. It's upsetting. But you cannot bail your child out of every single scenario that goes wrong in their life. You can be a support structure. You can be there for them and still not do it for them, because they do have to learn to do on their own. And part of that learning to do on your own is pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. And whenever you have a full generation of children who have been taught you're never going to have to do it on your own, we're all going to do it for you, and then it starts manifesting itself through government program into where they're saying, oh no, we're going to take care of your health care. We're going to take care of your child care. We're going to take care of all your basic needs. You'll own nothing and you'll be happy. You know, like and
that's the price.
Right.
It's, the price is, oh, well, you know what? You're not doing these things for yourself. So we get to call the shots in your life.
Right. Exactly. That's the thing. You're breeding a dependent generation of youth up and setting them out into the world in order so they can take your individuality away from you and give it to somebody else. And so
you're purchasing the freedom of the entitled with provision.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Right. Oh, you're entitled to this? Sure. We'll give it to you.
Right.
It's absolutely no different than a pimp taking advantage of a woman by getting her addicted to a drug that he will be the one that provides her with.
Right. And none of these people that have been raised in this way that are advocating for the taking of the individual's freedoms feel any responsibility for their actions or their own life.
No, absolutely not.
Everybody else is responsible for them. And this is what has bred a weak,
that is the
embittered man.
Yep. That will radicalize.
Yeah.
Because regardless of what the government provides, right,
mm-hmm.
it still does not meet the natural requirement.
Because they have because the government's providing everything except for meaning, except for a purpose. And so they go out
except for the biological imperative.
Yeah, they go out and they throw a temper tantrum in the middle of the street and set businesses on fire, and call themselves anti-fascists,
Yep.
And that's now their purpose.
But they still don't have a family.
Right.
Right.
Yep.
And that's still an aspect of them as a human species that is not being met, which
mm-hmm.
is why radicalism is a bottomless pit.
Right.
Because radicalism is the expression of a lack of purpose, and it's through a means that cannot ever provide fully for that lack of purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
In that you have to go back to biological essentialism, which is a reason that radicals, especially leftist radicals, absolutely despise any biological essentialism, because to address biological essentialism, it means that they're an admission that their radical ideology does not fulfill the individuals that subscribe to it. Right. So you have to attack biological essentialism in order to eradicate the potential for that question to be asked. Right?
Well, man, we've been going right at an hour.
Heading reality off. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, all right.
You want to close this up?
Yeah, we can close it up. Right. I think I hit a lot of the points that I want to hit on, and we can actually lead into women next time.
Okay.
And then we'll do that great big topic after. It'll lead into both nicely.
Nice. All right. Well, I'm going to stop the recording.
All right. Take care, Bob.
If you're gonna play, scam, pick and choose, well, it's a game that was made for you to lose. It doesn't really matter how many times, it's the same old worn-out stories, same old lines. They're all pointing dirty fingers in hypocrisy, bragging on their feats of mediocrity again. making any kind of change, but they keep on getting re-elected, and I find that strange. And that's why I say fuck them, don't feed them, cause we don't even need them. I never celebrate the tyrants that are taking our freedoms. Yeah, I said fuck them, don't feed them, cause we don't even need them. I never celebrate the tyrants that are taking our freedoms. What's it gonna take for you to see that we're living in a rigged democracy? People stand in line for the things that they've been choosing, paying no attention to the rights they keep on losing. But they all gather in the rallies and they chant their names, on goddamn well that it's all gonna be the same. Just 4 more years of war and taxes, 4 more years of them grinding down their axes. And that's why I say fuck them, don't feed them, cause we don't even need them. I never celebrate the tyrants that are taking our freedoms. Yeah, fuck them, don't feed them, cause we don't even need them. I never celebrate the tyrants that are taking our freedoms. Cause we don't even need them. We'll never celebrate the tyrants that are taking our freedom. Fuck them, don't feed them, cause we don't even need them. I'll never celebrate the tyrants that are taking our freedom.